You were the one who noticed when the electricity bill hadn't been paid, the one who learned to read a room before you learned to read a book, sensing tension in your parents' voices before you understood what any of it meant. While other kids were worrying about homework and friendships, you were quietly worrying about whether everyone else in the house was okay. No one handed you a title. No one sat you down and said, "You're in charge now." And yet somehow you became the responsible one, the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who held things together while everyone else was allowed to simply be a child. You are an adult now, and somehow you're still doing it. This experience has a name in psychology, and it explains far more about your adult life, your relationships, your exhaustion, your difficulty asking for help than most people ever realize. If you were the responsible one growing up, you likely became an adult who is remarkable in a crisis and completely lost when it comes to letting someone take care of you. Welcome back to Milky Way Psychology. Today we are going to break down 8 signs you grew up as the responsible one, the psychological mechanism behind it, and what it's quietly cost you. Stay until the end because the final sign is the one most people never realize is connected to all the others. 1. You became emotionally attuned before you became anything else. Have you ever wondered why you can read a room the moment you walk into it, sense tension, gauge someone's mood, know exactly when to go quiet? Psychologists call the broader pattern you likely grew up inside parentification, a well-documented family dynamic in which a child takes on adult-level emotional or practical responsibilities, often the emotional caretaking of a parent, before they are developmentally ready to do so. Children in these environments develop early, sharp emotional radar out of necessity because in an unpredictable household, correctly reading the emotional climate wasn't a nice skill to have. It was often the thing that kept the peace, kept you safe, or kept a struggling parent from falling further apart. 2. You learn to manage adults before you learn to be a kid. If you found yourself calming a parent's anger, mediating between arguing adults, or offering comfort to someone who was supposed to be comforting you, you experienced what researchers specifically call emotional parentification, a subtype in which the child's role centers on managing a parent's emotional needs rather than practical household tasks. This is different from simply having chores. This is a child functioning in key emotional moments, more like a partner or a therapist than a son or daughter. A role reversal that can feel, at the time, like being trusted or needed, but that quietly asks a child to carry weight no child is equipped to carry. 3. You became fluent in everyone's needs but your own. Ask yourself honestly, could you name right now what you actually want for dinner, this weekend, or out of your life in general, without first thinking about what would be easiest for everyone around you? Children who grow up responsible for managing a household's emotional or practical stability often develop what psychologists describe as an external locus of attention, a habitual focus on other people's needs, so consistent that awareness of one's own needs can genuinely atrophy from disuse. This isn't selflessness in the way it's often praised. It's a skill built under pressure, and like any skill built under pressure, it came with a cost. A diminished, sometimes barely audible connection to your own internal preferences. And this leads to the 4th sign because a person fluent in everyone else's needs often struggles badly when it's their turn to receive care. 4. Receiving help feels worse than not getting it. Have you noticed a strange discomfort when someone tries to take care of you, help you move, check in on your bad day, simply do something kind without being asked? For many people who grew up as the responsible one, being on the receiving end of care feels unfamiliar to the point of being genuinely uncomfortable. This connects to disrupted role reciprocity, the healthy back and forth of giving and receiving care that typically develops in childhood, but which can remain lopsided when a child spent years mostly giving. You didn't get much practice being cared for. You got a great deal of practice doing the caring. And a skill this asymmetrical doesn't correct itself automatically just because you're an adult now. It takes deliberate, often uncomfortable practice to learn how to simply receive. 5. You feel responsible for things that were never yours to fix. A friend has a bad day, and before you've even processed your own feelings about it, you're already problem-solving theirs. A family member is struggling, and some part of you assumes almost automatically that it's your job to fix it. Psychologists studying parentification describe this carryover as inappropriate responsibility, an internalized belief that other people's well-being is at least partly your job to manage. This belief was accurate once, in a specific narrow context. Your childhood household genuinely may have needed you to hold things together. But the belief rarely stays contained to that original context. It tends to generalize, quietly attaching itself to nearly every relationship you're in well into adulthood. 6. You struggle to ask for help, even when you desperately need it. Somewhere along the way, you likely learned that needing help was inconvenient, or that asking simply wasn't an option, because the adults around you were already stretched thin. This creates what psychologists sometimes describe as compulsive self-reliance, a defensive independence formed not from genuine preference, but from the early absence of anyone reliably available to lean on. This is why you can be drowning and still insist you're fine, not because you don't need help, because somewhere very early, you learned that needing it rarely got met, and it felt safer to simply stop asking than to keep being disappointed. And this leads to the 7th sign, because a person who can't ask for help often ends up in relationships that quietly recreate the same imbalance. 7. You're drawn to relationships where you're the strong one. Have you noticed a pattern in your friendships or romantic relationships, a tendency to end up with people who need more support than they offer while your own needs quietly go unspoken? Psychologists connect this to repetition compulsion, a concept with roots in psychoanalytic theory, describing the unconscious tendency to recreate familiar relational dynamics, even painful ones, because familiar feels safer than unknown, regardless of whether it's actually healthy. Being the strong one is a role you know intimately. It's comfortable in its familiarity, even when it's exhausting in practice, which is exactly why so many former responsible ones find themselves, without quite meaning to, back in the same caretaking position they grew up in, just with different people standing in the same old roles. 8. Your worth feels tied to how useful you are. At the deepest level, many people who grew up as the responsible one absorbed a quiet, foundational belief. Love and belonging are earned through usefulness, not simply given. This connects to conditional positive regard, the belief that being valued depends on continuous contribution or performance rather than existing as a given. This is why rest can feel like failure, why saying no can feel like betrayal, and why simply existing without producing or fixing something can feel deeply uncomfortable. You didn't choose this equation. It was handed to you early by circumstances you didn't create, and it can, with real effort, be unlearned. Put these 8 signs together: the early emotional attunement, the reversed caretaking role, the atrophied awareness of your own needs, the discomfort receiving help, the inappropriate sense of responsibility for others, the compulsive self-reliance, the relationships that recreate old imbalances, and the worth tied to usefulness, and a single clear picture emerges. You were never simply naturally responsible or mature for your age, the compliments you likely heard often as a child. You were a child carrying weight that belonged to the adults around you, and you adapted to that weight with remarkable skill. That skill kept you safe then, but it is very likely costing you now in exhaustion, in relationships that lean too heavily in one direction, in a nervous system that has never fully learned how to rest, receive, or simply be a person instead of a role. If you recognize yourself in even a few of these 8 signs, understand this: you are not broken, and you are not alone in this. The responsibility you carried as a child was never actually yours to carry. It was placed on you by circumstances beyond your control, and you adapted to survive them with everything you had. You are allowed to put some of that weight down now. You are allowed to receive care without earning it first, and you are allowed, finally, to simply be taken care of sometimes, instead of always being the one who does the taking care. Thank you for spending this time with Milky Way Psychology. If this described your childhood, share your story in the comments. You would be surprised how many people in this comment section grew up exactly the same way. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if this video helped you understand a pattern you've carried for a long time.
Thank you. Say goodbye.